Hey, Brune.
Hey Brune, nice to see you again.
Likewise. So, you're looking to go pro in podcast production on both sides of the Atlantic.
I am.
And last week, you shared precious advice from two people in the podcast industry you connected with in Canada and the US. Where are you taking us this week?
We're gonna go to Amsterdam first, where I got the chance to learn a ton about the intricacies of audio work from someone who Ira Glass referred to as one of the best interviewers he'd ever heard.
Wow, cool.
Very cool. And then we'll be in Brussels, in Belgium, where I've been living for the last 2 years, where I received invaluable tips from the chairman of the Flemish Trade Association for Audio Makers. And then...
Ooh, there's more than two?
Well, I might mention North America again quickly at the end because I had a very unexpected call with someone about potential work.
Oh my goodness! All right, let's go.
Hi everybody, I'm Brune Smith, a storytelling producer and 3-time indie podcast creator, newly looking for work in podcast production. This is Podcasting Job, an 8-week limited series where I take you behind the scenes of my job search in real time. Welcome to week 6.
All right, so Amsterdam.
Yes, a friend of mine from the storytelling world introduced me to Jonathan Gruber, who I then met on Google Meet, and he was incredibly generous with his time and insights. He's been living in Amsterdam for many years. He's an award-winning international journalist. His work has been broadcast by public radio in the US, the UK, and the Netherlands. He was also one of Europe's first podcasters.
Oh, nice.
Right? These days, he makes podcasts for pretty big brands. And last but not least, he is a trainer in media and journalism, which probably explains why our call organically turned into an impromptu masterclass in starting out as an audio maker.
Okay, so branded podcasts. That's a great segue from our last episode where you mentioned opening up to the idea of offering that service yourself.
I did.
Anything Jonathan had to learn the hard way when it comes to working with corporate clients?
Oh, yes. One of the very first things Jonathan told me was, and I quote, "Your desires and wishes will be subverted."
Say more.
Basically, he said that because a lot of brands don't know the first thing about compelling audio, they often mess with the process with an old-timey marketing agenda. My words, not his. And as a result, a lot of the time you end up creating work that you're not necessarily proud of.
Yikes, we are warned. Any branded project he created that he is proud of?
Of course, thankfully, there are many. I highly recommend Their Journey, which is a 2-season true stories narrative show he produced for KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. The idea was to create something interesting to listen to on the airplane.
Cool concept.
I think so too. It explores individuals' high-stakes travel stories, and Jonathan's many production skills really shine through, from story structure to interviewing to sound design to pacing, all of it.
Did the extent of Jonathan's audio work experience make you feel like you have a lot to learn?
You know, it's interesting. It did and it didn't. I obviously have a lot to learn in production, and I'm excited about that because that's what makes work fascinating. You learn by doing. We want to learn things every day. But there was this one sentence that Jonathan said about his own skills that made me realize one of the strengths I already have.
What did he say?
He said he knows how to write for the spoken word. I jotted that down and highlighted it on my notebook because on my own path, having helped dozens and dozens of people tell personal stories on stage in a conversational manner, but also having now scripted many podcast episodes, writing for the spoken word is a skill I also have to a certain extent, and I am so excited to use that skill for my future clients.
That's really good. Now, given Jonathan's industry knowledge on both sides of the Atlantic, was there anything you were most excited to ask him about?
I'd actually been curious about how accessible it is for us Europeans to get freelance remote work for the UK, where there is a huge audio market.
So what's Jonathan's verdict?
It is a two-part answer. Kind of like there's hope and also here's the reality of the industry. So number one, while Brexit did complicate things, there are some jobs you can get in the UK as a European freelancer. For example, interviewing people locally in Brussels for a UK-based production. And Jonathan recommended I join the UK Audio Network, also known as UCAN. Their website is ukaudio.network/join. I'll put it in the show notes.
And the less hopeful part?
Well, part two of the answer is about the state of the Anglophone podcast industry. I touched on it in our last episode. Jonathan was quite adamant about the fact that currently the podcast market in English is saturated, while the podcast market in French is growing. So his advice was really for me to put most of my efforts into looking for work in French, especially if I want to do narrative podcasts. They are apparently much more recent in France. That makes sense to me. So it sounds like they can be more welcoming and a bigger playground for me.
How did that make you feel?
Listen, I was born in France, but when it comes to my storytelling, writing, editing skills, my working life, my personal life, all of that's been mostly in English for the last 6 or 7 years, so I'm always going to have an inclination towards English. With that being said, it's great news that there's work for me in my first language. I love translation and adaptation, and I think transferring my skills from one language to another can really be fun and satisfying.
Any last thoughts you'd like to share from Jonathan's masterclass?
I want to mention tech stuff for a minute. If you're listening to this and software is not your thing, just bear with me for a second, because I think for indies going pro like me, it can be helpful. Jonathan shared with me his editing process and the softwares that he uses to edit. He said that while Pro Tools is the industry standard, it's way too complicated. He mentioned using both Descript and Hindenburg. I'd never heard of the latter. Also, Squadcast for interviews. It's kind of like Riverside and it is owned by Descript. He also said Reaper is great and more complex than Audacity, which is the one I've been using. I am looking forward to trying different softwares, but my sense after talking to different people in the industry is that we all have our favorites. And while there's always going to be a next shiny object, I say stick to the one that works for you. All right, I'm done with the techie stuff. Massive thanks to Jonathan Gruber.
Are we going to Brussels?
Let's go.
Okay, I believe you talked to the chairman of the Flemish Trade Association for Audio Makers.
I did. His name is Lucas de Ricke. He was super kind and helpful. The trade association is called Klankverbond, which means sound union in Flemish. That's Belgium's own version of Dutch. And they are there to support audio makers.
It sounds like, as a freelancer, you actually have access to a lot of help.
Absolutely. And when I started out my journey, I was sort of afraid of feeling alone. And both Jonathan and Lucas reinforced for me the fact that there are great organizations that are there to help you find work, but are also there to offer workshops and support to professionalize people's skills and to put you in touch with potential collaborators. That's what Klankverbond does, as well as lobbying to get funding for productions.
But wait, I assume this trade association is for Flemish-speaking professionals only?
Actually, it isn't. Flemish is their language of choice when it comes to email communication, for example. But in fact, they help professionals from any language. And their workshops and masterclasses are mostly in English. So that works for me.
Perfect. Now, Belgium's other language is French. Did Lucas mention anything about working in your first language?
He did. He highly recommended I check out ACSR, which is kind of the French counterpart organization to Klankverbond. It stands for Atelier de Création Sonore Radiophonique. According to Lucas, they're really good in particular when it comes to helping produce narrative podcasts in French. which sort of echoes what Jonathan hinted at when it comes to which parts of the audio market are thriving.
I love how much more granular your knowledge is getting with every person you meet.
Me too. And on that note, one last thing Lucas taught me that I really needed to know is he gave me a sense of the pricing for beginners. He said that beginner audio makers charge anywhere between 350 to 400 euros a day. Anything under 300 doesn't really make sense. And the more established and equipped audio makers might charge something around 500 euros a day. I'm sure some charge north of that, but that gives you a ballpark. A big thank you to Lucas for all of his insights.
All right, Brune, the time has come. Before signing off, let's go back to North America quickly. Tell us about that call you had about potential work.
Friends, this was a very happy development in this adventure of mine you're following. So, a dear friend of mine from Toronto, where I used to live, emailed me saying, I think you should talk to my friend Emily. So I got on a call with Emily, who I supposed worked in the podcast industry. And apparently what our friend in common told her before we met was, I think you should talk to Brune. She's got this current podcasting job project. She's really creative and you can trust her. That felt really good to hear. You never really know what people will recommend you for. So, yeah, Emily does not work in podcasting.
What does she do?
Well, she said, I work for a tech company with clients such as the NBA, Burning Man, New York City Pride, and I think we need a podcast. And she continued, I think you'd be great in producing it for us.
Oh my God, Brune, did you freak out?
Yeah, it was so unexpected and it got me so excited. I have to say, imposter syndrome did kick in, but I also have total faith that I can lead a project like that. And I would be so excited if it worked out. And if I need to, I've already started creating a network of people I can surround myself with. So I asked her a bunch of questions about who their audience would be, about the company's existing marketing strategies, things like that. And before I knew it, we were talking about next steps, namely her broaching the idea to her marketing department. Maybe this won't lead anywhere, but it gave me hope. To be continued.
Yes, keep us posted. Thanks for talking to me today, Brune.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for listening. This episode was produced and edited by me with help from Julia Mermelstein and Mitch Butler. Original concept by Mitch Butler. Special thanks to Jonathan Gruber of Gruber Media and Lucas de Rieke of Klangverbund. Their respective websites are in the show notes. These conversations couldn't have happened without Milda Varnoskaite, Angela Thomas, Toon van Mierlo over at Passaporta, Brussels International House of Literature, which is also where I script most of my episodes. Last but not least, special thanks to Erin Rogers and Andrew Heron. I hope you got something out of it. Before you go, I would like to kindly ask for your contribution. If you have any piece of advice for me or know anyone in the podcasting industry I could reach out to for help, please email me at podcastingjob@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe or follow the podcast wherever you're listening so you don't miss an episode. If you have friends who are creative thinkers of any kind, please share this episode on your socials. It might be of interest to them. Lastly, next time you're on the subway or in line at the grocery store, please think of me and leave a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts so that others can discover it as well. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.